We have with us the now very slim Congressman Tom Reed, who was on television quite a bit this week on a couple of the networks as he was grilling the people in the IRS. Now, I haven't seen Congressman Reed since he went on his diet and lost all that weight, but you don't look like the same person, Congressman.
Well, I appreciate that, Kevin. I'm down about 110 pounds, and I feel great, so I appreciate that those kind words.
Well, they weren't necessarily kind. They're just stating a fact. Now, listen, my question, I know you were a bad diabetic. My question is for all of the diabetics out in Radioland, did that make your diabetes go away?
It did, Kevin. I will tell you, within 2 days after I had the gastric bypass surgery, my diabetes went away, and I'm completely off all diabetes medicine, and all the blood sugars are stabilized. So it's been amazing, and it's been a great step in the right direction for me.
Okay, very good. Well, I wanted people to hear that because a lot of folks, once they lose weight, they can come off those, I think, terrible pills. All right, now, Congressman, President Obama said on national television, it's been repeated several times by all the networks, that there was not a smidgen of corruption in the IRS investigation. Some say persecution of right-wing groups. The FBI, meanwhile, says it has completed an investigation, but they didn't talk to any of the victims. Now, one commentator put it this way: either President Obama is lying and covering up a major crime, or he's simply stupid. What is your take, Congressman?
Well, I think comments like that from the Commander-in-Chief, as I asked the Commissioner of the IRS the other day, and that's maybe what you're referring to as on the network news shows, was that a responsible position or statement to make to millions of Americans when we all agree that there's 6 open investigations still pending? We're still getting data. We're getting evidence in emails that are clearly showing that there was ill will or a malicious type of intent in regards to the Tea Party targeting scandal. And so to say that there's no smidgen of corruption, one iota whatsoever, to me is just irresponsible, and is something that we got to get to the bottom of to root out, and especially with the IRS, to make sure that an agency like that must be fair, must be objective, and to have the Commander-in-Chief make that comment to me was very problematic and irresponsible. And hopefully the Commissioner of the IRS will join us as he's newly appointed and to hold the agency accountable and clean this out once and for all.
Well, I hope you have a piece of pie before he does it, Congressman, because they don't seem to be moving. Now, that brings me to our next question. Isn't it time that we had a special prosecutor, or at the very minimum, a special congressional investigation? Because the IRS is potentially as dangerous to us as something like the Gestapo.
Yeah, we're moving in, I think, that direction.
Which direction?
Working into a select committee. I mean, I have supported in the Benghazi situation, for example, the appointment of a select committee. Now at the IRS, we're still going through, though, at the committee level, hundreds of thousands of emails and documents. So we may not be there at this moment, but I think we're moving in that direction, and there's enough smoking gun here that maybe we'll get to that point here in the near future. But my hope is we can avoid that, because once you go down the path of a select committee, you're talking millions of dollars. You're talking about going through the learning curve from starting at square one. So hopefully we can complete it through the committee process. But I'm open, and we may be moving in that direction as to a select committee. But I think it's a little bit early, but we're going in that way.
Listen, unlike the Watergate scandal, which was covered ad nauseum by the media because, they hated Nixon. I guess everyone knew that. The media, with the exception of Fox, maybe the Wall Street Journal, they're covering all this up. You'd never know there was a scandal at the IRS. Is that frustrating to you, members of Congress, when you know what's really happened and what's going down, as they say, that the media ignores it?
It's frustrating, but it's par for the course. And what I try to focus on is just ask the questions, get to the facts, because eventually those facts you can't hide from. And that's where we're going. And when the president makes the comment like no smidgen of corruption, that's a pretty conclusive statement and position to take. And that's just going to keep this thing going and keep putting fodder into the issue as we move on.
Had John Boehner, by the way, I'm talking with Congressman Tom Reed filling in for Brian O'Neill this week, who's ill. Had John Boehner, Congressman, signed on to the so-called Schumer plan for immigration, the GOP, it is believed, would have been in big trouble with its conservative base. Is that why Boehner pulled back? And where do you stand on the Democrat immigration plan?
Well, where we stand, first of all, is, I do not support amnesty. And I have been working very hard in the areas of agriculture and student visas to streamline and make the system much more effective. And that's, where we could do a lot of work because of the interest in our district, where the needs for agricultural workers and for our students coming out of our college and universities. But where the speaker went, I think, was to try to at least say, we got to deal with this issue. There are 11 million people that are here illegally in America. But I think he did recognize here this past week that, getting to the finish line when you got the other side saying it's got to be my way or the highway with 100% citizenship for all of these people that violated the law, that I don't support. And that's where I think the speaker was recognizing that we're not going to get there if that's where the other side is going to demand the line be drawn.
Okay, in the course of a week, Boehner seemed to change his story when he was at that retreat you people had in, I guess, Maryland. He seemed to indicate they were going to work out something with the Democrats. Then he came out and said, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, we can't trust Obama to enforce the law because of what he's done so far. Therefore, our team, the Republicans, will not pass an immigration law. Well, doesn't that make it possible for Obama to assume, let's be blunt about it, the dictatorial powers he has assumed and just push it through anyway?
Well, that's always a concern. I mean, that's the concern we've had with this president using executive authority to a level that, in my opinion, is somewhat unprecedented and should be held in check. And that's what our founding fathers envisioned, and it's something I firmly believe in, is that check on the checks and balances that the system inherently is set up to provide. But I don't know where the president will go with it in regards to using the executive authority on immigration. But, the broad, comprehensive immigration bill that they're pushing out of the Senate would definitely be way beyond, I think, anything the president would contemplate doing. And hopefully he won't go down that path. But we'll hold him accountable. We'll keep putting the spotlight when he does cross that line. But I think the speaker also recognized, that when he was talking about legal status, he was not talking about citizenship. He's just talking about a way to maybe find a path to a resolution that is not amnesty, but really stands up for what is fair in regards to recognizing people who came here legally versus those who came here illegally, and the penalty for those who came here illegally has to be in place, and we got to secure the border at the same time we're dealing with that penalty.
House Republicans, this is hardly a secret, are using the term lawless in describing President Obama. Now, that's the kind of thing that could lead to impeachment. Is he, in your opinion, lawless?
I don't engage into that level of rhetoric when it comes to the president right now, but I am very concerned about the executive authority that he is trying to exert with his phone and pen comment that he made here recently. We have seen him try to go around Congress repeatedly, and to me, and the strongest argument that I've had in Washington, D.C. with people across the aisle, because we talk with everybody down there, Kevin, as you know, is that, he's not going to be president forever. And there may be somebody who sits in that position that you may disagree with. And I'll tell you, even Democrats on the other side of the aisle, their eyes go light up, and they say, you know what, you're absolutely right. That's why we need to make sure that we join in putting a check on where the president is going with this executive authority. And to me, it's real problematic, and I think the people are waking up to it.
You mean the Democrats are waking? I mean, every Democrat I hear says the guy's wonderful, let's go with him. I don't know who you're talking with.
Well, there are members that are expressing the concern. There are people that we come across on a regular basis that, this system has worked for hundreds of years, and if you violate this system, you're jeopardizing what we all hold near and dear, and that's the American way of life and the American government. Okay,
now Senator Ted Cruz was a little more direct. He said, and again I'm paraphrasing, although I think these are the actual words, that Barack Obama is a very dangerous man, a danger to the republic. Is that going too far, or is that about on the mark?
You know, I believe that what we have to keep an eye on. I think some of this rhetoric sometimes does go a little too far, in my humble opinion. But the concept that is being highlighted, that a president who is unchecked, one who is using the authority of the presidency way beyond what the Constitution allows and the checks and balances envisioned by our founding fathers, is something we have to be diligent on every day we're in office and we're in Washington, D.C., is to make sure that this system we stand for and is preserved and protected. And I think the president has exerted executive authority to a level that rightfully has caused question, and we're going to continue to hold him accountable. And ultimately, it's up to the people to stand up and say, no, we're not accepting this type of activity from our president.
Well, that's if they know. We'll take a break. I'm talking with Congressman Tom Reed. We're talking about the situation, the scandals, and many people say the crimes and corruptions in Washington, and what, if anything, is being. We'll be back in just a moment. Congressman Tom Reed is our guest today, and we're talking about the situation in Washington, which is not pretty, unless you happen to watch NBC News, and then everything's wonderful. Thank God there are other networks that are telling you what's really happening. You know, NBC had a real problem, Congressman, when the House held Attorney General Holder in contempt because they'd never reported on anything he had done or not done, and suddenly they had to report he was held in contempt without explaining why. How can he continue to function when he's in contempt of Congress?
Well, that's where I do tip my hat to the folks over in oversight and to the committee under Darrell Iss's chairmanship, and they have been very energetic and diligent in that oversight function, and that's where we got to continue to push forward on each one of these questions and to hold these officials accountable, and that's where I think you saw last week in front of our committee when the new IRS commissioner came over. I was very direct in questioning him and said, look at you. We want you to be an independent body, and if you're not, we're going to hold you accountable. And also, when you're looking for things from Congress, we're going to demand accountability in regards to metrics and to cost-benefit type of analysis. And the new commissioner did assure me that was the way he was going to approach the job, and that's where I'm going to hold him accountable to those words here when he comes before our committee down the road.
He's the third one in about a year. Didn't he, in fact, also say that these IRS abuses didn't happen on his watch and he'll leave it to the several groups investigating? Didn't he pretty much take that stance?
He did, and he comes to the position as a new appointee, and he's kind of trying to articulate that he didn't have anything to do with it in the sense that he's the new appointee. But that's why we got to continue these investigations. And when the commander-in-chief and the president make statements like there's no smidgen of evidence of corruption, that is just playing politics with a very troubling situation that needs to be investigated to the end, and the people that did this held accountable, and where it ends.
Okay, one more question about the House Republicans, and I'll move on to something else. Many conservative commentators, and I suspect some members of Congress, in fact, I know some members of Congress, Republican members of the caucus, are saying that John Boehner and then over in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, are simply not the right people to take on Barack Obama at this point in history, that they need really tough leadership. What's your opinion?
Well, I think one of the things we need to be focusing on is, as the president said, elections have consequences. And we got an election coming up here in 2014 where the Senate, you got to remember, Mitch McConnell is not the majority leader of the Senate. Harry Reid has blocked legislation after legislation in the U.S. Senate. And if we can change the majority in the Senate and hold the majority in the House, which is a bare minimum, keeping that majority in the House because that's been the insurance policy. If you could just imagine, Kevin, if the last 2 years President Obama had complete control in Washington, D.C., and we weren't in the majority, and the last 2 years of his administration would be something that we would all, I think, agree on this station and in our conversation is something we don't envision for America going forward. And so I think that the focus should be on how do we preserve that majority in the House, and also how do we take back the Senate? Because if the Senate and the House can unite in its effort against the president, now you have a direct conversation and a very open and honest debate that the people can really judge and get input on.
Listen, back in the Watergate days, even Republicans who defended Nixon ultimately said, yeah, I guess the guy's got to go. I don't see any Democrats saying anything like that about Obama, that he's going too far, that he's inept. I don't hear any of that. Do you hear that?
I think watch what they're doing. I think there's folks that I've talked with about the checks and balances and keeping the executive authority in check, and they do. They recognize that that could be a shift in the way our government operates out of Washington, D.C., and they're very sensitive to it. They're not going to say it publicly, obviously, but that conversation, that subtle conversation is occurring. But also see what they're doing publicly. A lot of these individuals on the other side of the aisle are saying they don't want the president to be campaigning with them. They doesn't want to be seen with the president. I think we're just starting to see the beginning of where this is going to go, and I think time will tell how far they're willing to move on the issue.
Okay. Wall Street Journal this past week had a very frightening story about terrorism in California, a group of terrorists taking out a power grid. There have been similar incidents in Virginia and in the Boston area. What can you tell us about this danger? And a lot of people are saying, Barack Obama is just not the man to be in charge when we're under this kind of threat. So you've got two questions there.
You first on the threats to our utility grids, and I was very troubled to see those reports coming out of California as to those attacks on the utility grid. It is something that wasn't widely reported on.
No.
It wasn't really out there in the media. And when it came to our attention, I was very concerned to see how it happened, why it wasn't reported on, and what they're doing to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But it reminds me that we have to be diligent here on American soil because these threats are real. There are real threats to our safety that exist here on our soil, and we need to be very diligent to make sure that we're watching and we're in a position to fight them, not here, but rather in other areas of the world on their soil, not on American soil. So it just reminds me of the need to be diligent, and we're going to do what we can to make sure that we stand to protect those infrastructure needs, like our utility grids. And then as to the commander-in-chief, I'll leave that up to the people to decide whether or not he's doing his job to make sure that we keep ourselves safe here in America. But I'm concerned, and I'll tell you, when you have the inconsistency coming out of the White House that I have seen on display in the foreign affairs arena, that is problematic, and it should be troublesome to all of us.
What you just heard was a rerun of a program I did Saturday as I was filling in for Brian O'Neill on his Saturday morning talk show, an interview with Congressman Tom Reed. The reason we have rerun it is because the information is still pertinent, and in fact, Congressman Reed makes some very salient points about the corruption in Washington. Now stay tuned for more news and information.